Flight attendants, what's your NSFW story while on the job? Story 1. A long flight from Seattle to Japan. Two single people in an otherwise empty 4-seat row start to hit it off. 2 hours later, they are sitting right next to each other and absolutely smitten in an otherwise empty 4-seat row. 3 hours later, they are sitting right next to each other with a couple blankets over their laps and hands. Both of them went to the bathroom in the back of the plane. They were seated closer to the front within 3 minutes of each other, get back to their seats eventually, and fall asleep leaning on each other. Guy wakes up and moves back to his original seat. To have more space to sleep, I assume. Lady gets agitated. Guy goes back to sleep and lady watches movies, constantly looking over at him sleeping. Plane lands. Guy gets in opposite conga deplaning line than lady. I follow them onto the concourse. For science. Lady can't find Guy. Guy is gone. Story 2. Happened to me on a flight to Russia a while back. Met an older lady at the bar. She was probably 50. I was 23 or so. She and I shared drinks. We found out we were both on the same flight. She followed me onto the plane, sat next to me, spoke to the flight attendant in Russian, assuming she was switching seats right here. Already drunk, she ordered us wine and gave me some sleeping pills. I woke up and I had sent a bunch of Snapchats to my buddies making out with this woman. I don't remember any of it. Might have done more than just this. I thought I slept the whole flight. Then she bought me dinner at the airport during my layover. She then went on her way, and I fell asleep at my gate. There was a gate change while I was asleep, woke up to last call boarding my name. Ran through the airport onto the tarmac in February in flip-flops and shorts, almost missed my flight. Then she found me on Facebook and sent me messages almost every day to come vacation in Italy with her. I had to block her. First and last time I take sleeping pills and alcohol together. Learned my lesson. Story 3. Had a medical emergency my first year flying. Guy was in first class and was in the bathroom for a long time. I knocked and asked if he was okay, and he said yeah. I told him to press the call light in there if he needed help. A minute later, he presses the call light and says he needs a doctor. Turns out he's having trouble urinating cause of his cancer treatment, and we page for medical help, and 3 doctor's nurses come to help. We set up blankets on the ground and make a curtain for some privacy, and I get the urinary catheter from the medical kit. Dude is screaming and groaning in pain because he needs to pee but can't. We lay the guy down and off goes his pants. I hold his hand and head with my hands while he is huffing and puffing in pain. The urinary catheter goes on while his bits are there for everyone to see. At that exact moment, the flight attendant in the back, who for some reason has no idea what's going on, opens the curtain while this dude's dick is out and he's groaning in pain, points at the oven, and in a southern accent says, "Mind if I get my sandwich?" We all stare at her in disbelief for a moment, and then she goes, "I guess I'll come back in a little bit." It was hilarious looking back, but to finish my story, the catheter didn't work, and they said he needed a hospital to do an incision. We didn't divert because we were already close to the destination, and dude was in the bathroom while landing, periodically moaning and gasping in pain. The paramedics come, he goes on the stretcher, and he gives me his wife's number, and I call her to let her know what's going on. I feel like I should have gotten something, a compliment or anything for assisting, but nope, nothing. Meanwhile, the other FA is worried about her sandwich. Story 4. I was on a flight to Paris with next to no people for some reason. Couple gets on board and seems very lovey and also very drunk. I'm on a window row alone, and they sit a row behind me to the right, the 3 seats in the middle. They get handsier as the flight progresses. I can hear them very well. He keeps supplying her with champagne. She starts to fall asleep on and off. He keeps trying to get her to fool around or go to the bathroom with him. Over the course of an hour or so, I realize they don't know each other and met in the airport. This is based on context clues of their conversation and what they tell FAs. He's still ordering drinks and waking her up to kind of fool around. He eventually goes to the bathroom and she basically passes out. I take the opportunity to let the FA know what's going on. It's disruptive on an overnight flight, and that I think may be unsafe for her. The FA catches him coming out of the bathroom looking for her because she didn't meet him in there. They make him sit in a different row and mostly leave her alone. He keeps trying to get her attention, but she ignores him for the rest of flight after waking up. Maybe not totally NSFW, but I always wonder what the full deal was, and if she was okay, or would have been if they weren't separated. Story 5. My mom was a station manager, not an attendant, but she had a few funny NSFW stories. We lived on an island, so most of the planes were smaller, overwing prop planes, larger than Cessnas, and big enough to have a cockpit with a shutting door, but not big enough to have a bathroom, and small enough to have very specific weights and balances. Every once in a while in the right season, planes would have only a handful of passengers. One time, there was only a pair of people on the whole flight, a couple. Halfway into the flight, the pilots radioed in a strange issue. The plane felt like it was chugging and bouncing. They were worried. They were over the ocean, so couldn't just land but requested priority to the closest runway. It was serious. A few minutes later, they radioed back and said never mind. When they landed, the passengers grabbed their crap and left ASAP. The pilots told my mom what happened. The passengers were seated in the front row for balance, but once in the air decided to go all the way to the seats in the tail. And when the co-pilot came out, the man was pounding the woman so hard it was making the rear of the little plane reverb and bounce. Story 6. Not an FA but a ground crew. We had a flight that was fully loaded and boarded and ready to push, but the captain told us it was going to be a while. About 15 minutes later, another ground crew drives up a set of stairs to the back of the plane, and passengers start deboarding from both the jet bridge and the stairs. Meanwhile, several fire trucks and ambulances show up. The FO came down to the ramp to inform us what was going on. Apparently, a very obese passenger had gotten stuck in their seat and was asking an FA for help getting out, and in that process, the passenger had explosive diarrhea. All over himself, the seat, the FA, his seatmates, and all over the floor. The fire department ended up cutting the passenger out of the seat, and the plane went out of service. It was so bad that they brought the stairs to exit the passengers behind him from the rear of the plane, something I have never seen done on a gate before. Story 7. During COVID, I had some passengers come back and say, "Hey, I think there's some people going at it in the exit row." My eyes went wide as I tried to comprehend what I heard. Before I could open my mouth to respond, another person came back and said, "Hey, I think the people in the exit row are going at it." I immediately got up to go break it up when the captain came over and said to prepare for moderate to severe turbulence. Everyone immediately sat down and strapped in, and within 30 seconds we were hit with some incredibly rough air, which lasted about 5 minutes. After which the captain called and told us that he was going to prepare us for landing immediately because the descent was going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride. So, lights went to bright, flight attendants came through the aisle collecting trash and doing final safety checks, and by the time I made it to the exit row, I was incredibly surprised to see that the only people in that row were Amish Mennonites. Guess the appeal of the Mile High Club speaks to all of us, regardless of religious background or way of life. Story 8. Second-hand from the pilot. It's pre-9/11. Terrorism hasn't quite taken on the zeitgeist we know today. My friend is a captain on a Northwest flight, and midway through the head FA comes in and informs him there is a bomb on the plane. Well, this of course needs some attention, so he presses her on how she's sure of it. She replies that she overheard a passenger say the word bomb and pilot and went forward to warn the crew. Well, this didn't really make sense to my friend, so he tells his FO to stay there and just be ready, and has the FA take him back to where she heard the threat. Somewhere around business class, there was an Indian fellow with a very thick accent, and he was fiddling with his brand new PDA. When my buddy walked over and asked him about it, he was very excited to show off his Palm Pilot. The FA was pretty red in the face after that one, as I understand it. Story 9. Not a FA, but I was just traveling for business on a Southwest flight. I highly prefer the window seat and made sure I got on board early to grab a good one. Moments later, there is a heavy-set lady, maybe in her late 30 seconds, early 40 seconds, who boards and sits next to me in the middle seat. She was dressed with a very nice white and tight-fitting short skirt dress, maybe for business. The flight was very uncomfortable, as it was very apparent that something was wrong. She was sweating profusely and totally nervous the entire time. By the time the flight was done, I got kind of annoyed that she wasn't getting up and exiting the flight as early as she could have. We were close to the front of the plane. However, when the aisle cleared just enough, she booked it. She was off of that plane in as much of a hurry as you could ever imagine. I noticed that when she got up to leave, she pulled her skirt down a little and hurried off. At this point, what I normally do is lift the armrests to allow myself to slide out of the seats. Rather than stand up and walk out half-hunched, I'm 6. However, before I slide out, I thankfully glance down at her seat, and notice a puddle of blood just waiting for me to glide on over. I didn't remember seeing anything off color on her bleach white dress, so she must have done a great job managing her dress until she got up. It was really unbelievable, but I felt so bad for that poor woman and whoever the FA was that would ultimately have to attend to it. I've also been on 3 flights where they've been struck by lightning, an older lady having a heart attack, probably dying, being puked on, and countless other not fun experiences on flights. Story 10. Not a FA, but former ground crew. I worked for SkyWest and was working the early shift. It was like 4 a.m., and I was sitting in the pushback vehicle, waiting to get the all clear to go. Now it is standard procedure across all flights to have a headset connected to the plane, so you can keep in contact with the flight crew so they can tell you, hey, you're clear to go, or you can tell them whatever you see that they can't. Well, when it is plugged into the aircraft, it is constantly giving the pushback audio on an open mic. I was sitting there just listening, and can hear them doing the pre-flight checklist. When the FO suddenly says, oh crap, the pilot responds, what's wrong? I forgot to take my Valtrex this morning and I haven't told Rachel yet about it. For those unaware, Valtrex is herpes medication. The pilot responds, you're screw bud, because she is deadheading the next leg in Houston. Silence for about a minute. Then Tower, this is United. We seem to have an error and request to delay the flight to get it situated. I couldn't hear the response, but I then watched the door open and the FO come up to me in a panic and say, can you escort me to the crew domicile? I do just that, and the flight leaves 15 minutes late. Might not be NSFW, but it's funny nonetheless. Till Dr. First Officer forgot to take his herpes medicine and delayed a flight to go rush and take it so he wouldn't have to tell his mistress flight attendant. Story 11. During university, I was a flight attendant on a charter airline. The airline mostly flew government contracts, either prisoners going to a well-known detention center or military personnel. There were occasionally more fun charter groups, such as a time when a company chartered 2 planes to take their staff to the World Cup. I was the head flight attendant on a 757, with a total of 8 flight attendants on this particular flight. We were transporting a group of all men, maybe a total of 45 men. They were spread out throughout the plane. These men were returning from a military assignment. One of the flight attendants was particularly flirty with a few of the men. Halfway through the flight, I noticed there was a massive queue at one of the aft lavatories, but as there were multiples back there, I was curiously watching what was happening before making my way back there. After a while, I went to the back to suggest they use the other vacant lav. They all said they were okay waiting. I found that odd. I went to walk around and then returned a second time. I knew something odd was happening as the same guy was still waiting to enter the lav. In that moment, I decided to knock on the door. No answer. I knocked again. Still no answer. There is a way to unlock the door from the outside, so I did that. What I saw blew my mind. The flight attendant, who was particularly flirty, was sat on the toilet. A passenger was in front of her with his pants down. You can guess what was happening, I'm sure. The mind-blowing part, once he exited the lav, I noticed she was covered in semen. I mean, she looked like she dunked her head in the Krispy Kreme donut glazing bath. That was the day I learned what bukkake was. As the head flight attendant, I had to inform the captain. I also had to inform the person in charge of the group of men. The flight attendant had her employment terminated immediately. She sat in the toilet until we landed, and was sent home on a commercial flight as a passenger. The men had a very stern talking to by their leader. They weren't allowed out of their seats for the rest of the flight. The captain thought I was joking, but quickly realized I wasn't. He kept asking me if I was sure there was no mix-up, and what I saw couldn't have been something else. I asked him what else he thought it could have been. This was the longest flight of my life after this discovery. It was completely silent, and we mostly stayed in the galleys. I was flabbergasted. Passengers hooking up with flight attendants, or at least exchanging contact information, was common on some charter flights. But offering sexual pleasure in flight wasn't part of the job. Story 12. I've never been in a fight, and I've done everything in my power to avoid it. I was on an overnight flight to Europe from the US. It's COVID time, so the plane were pretty empty. Most of us had our own row. It's nighttime, so all the lights are off. I decide to lay across the row and put my flannel over my head so they couldn't see I wasn't wearing a mask. All of a sudden, I wake up to someone touching my leg. I assumed it was the flight attendant waking me up to tell me to put my mask on. I look up and I notice a dude with this blank expression standing over me. I asked him what he was doing. He just stared and leaned over to touch my thigh this time. I slapped his hand away. In front of me, there's a girl looking between the seats saying he tried doing that to her earlier. Again, I asked what he was doing, and he just stared. Had the dude walked away, I probably would have let it go and not said anything to avoid any problems. Then the dude goes up a row and tries to touch the girl again. I don't know what got into me. I don't know if it was the extra sugar cookie I ate at dinner, but I was all amped up. I got up and grabbed the dude and threw him on the ground. Mind you, I'm in the middle of a plane. I've never really gotten into a fight. Every fight video I've ever seen, people jump in to break up the fight. No one. I looked around and no one did anything. So now this dude is on the ground and I'm looking around like, I just threw a grown man on the floor? Isn't anyone going to stop me? I'm thinking I'm supposed to be getting restrained for being violent on a plane or something. The dude gets back up and just starts walking towards first class, disappearing into the dark like some shadow monster I just defeated. Again. I've never gotten into a fight, so I didn't know what happens next. I started walking to the back of the plane, where all the flight attendants hang out to confess my sins. Along the way, there were some kids, not kids, that were just staring at me shocked, saying, "That dude tried to do that to us too." Not gonna lie. When I heard them say that and I was the only one who did something about it, I felt like a badass. So I go to the back and I'm like, "Hey guys, I just threw a grown man touching people to the ground on a plane. Aren't you guys supposed to be stopping me or something?" I explained the situation and they just calmly said, "That's all right, sir. Have a seat and we'll take care of it." There was no urgency or shock over what I've done. It was almost as if I told them my tray table wouldn't stay up. I sit back in my seat waiting for something to happen. Then one of the flight attendants goes to the front of the plane and finds the dude. They just walked him back to the seat, sat him down, and the dude just went to sleep. That was it. The woman from the row in front of me thanked me, and all I could think was that this was some sort of fever dream. And that's how I met your mother. JK. Yeah, crap was wild. Story 13. Passenger, sympathetic to FAs. Our flight on a dash from Vancouver to Portland had been delayed multiple times for a technical problem, and waiting passengers were getting seriously cranky. This keeps happening long enough that the original flight crew get timed out, and a fresh crew get brought in, having to face the now even grumpier customers. Finally, the parts arrive, the mechanics finish, and it's boarding time. People are fuming by then, and you can tell that the FAs, who aren't responsible for any of the problems, know this will be the flight from down. My wife and I get seated near the galley, and we smile at the very young male FA, who we can tell is dreading the prospect of the angry folks, and is quite intimidated. He's wondering, semi-whispering out loud, "What can I do?" I eye the cart and notice they have quite a bit of booze for such a small plane. "Give everyone a free drink?" I suggest. His face lights up, he goes forward for a moment to consult with someone, and comes back smiling. "Sorry for the inconvenience. To make it up to everyone, drinks are free on this flight." You've never seen a crowd change disposition so fast. Not just a free drink, but all drinks. Yup, it was a party flight from then on. Everyone was in a great mood, and it was genuinely the most fun flight I've ever been on. Great views of the mountains, volcanoes and bright sunshine, all the way down too, as we're all sipping and laughing. Story 14. Horrible experience. Waiting to be told by a smart Netflix exec would be detailing the horrors the flight attendants experience during their training. The level of emotional manipulation and control tactics they use is inhumane. If you talk to any flight attendant, ask where their training was, and most of them will say they have trauma with that city now. They get them so excited that they pass their ridiculous speed dating techniques to get the job that they feel like they won the lottery. Little do they know, upon leaving a lot of flight attendants to work 2 jobs because it's minimum wage when it first starts in the flight industry. Employees are disposable. They get them interested based on the concept that they get free flights. However, companies know well they can never use their flight benefits. Of course, this does not represent everyone's experience, but I'd be willing to be a lot of flight attendants. I've had a similar experience. Story 15. Not a flight attendant, but ATC. During the peak of COVID, I worked a southbound flight Toronto, Jamaica. I work over Maryland, so almost halfway point. About 40 minutes later, I see the exact same flight number, and it's headed back to Toronto. So obviously, I call the guy working the plane and ask what's up with it. He said while it was over North Carolina, a late teens, early 20 passenger stood up in his seat and yelled, "I have COVID," to the entire plane, LOL, since it was over flying the US and not planning on landing there. Plus with it being peak COVID, the US was like, well, they're not landing here, so all these people that were just trying to go on a nice vacation in the sun, had to sit in a plane for 5 hours just to end up where they departed from. I was told the guy was arrested when they landed back in Toronto, and I imagine can't fly anymore. He claimed it was just a joke from the beginning, but either way I felt so bad for those passengers.